Void Mage Gamer is now partnered with Flipside Gaming, so you can use the promo code on their website, all caps Void Mage, to get 10% off all orders $10 or more. It's a great way that you can support both Flipside Gaming and Void Mage Gamer's channel. Hello guys, welcome back to another 10 underrated commander cards list. I do pull these video options off to my patrons over on patreon.com, so if you are interested in having a say on what video topics I do, that is what I recommend. A lot of people really like my underrated commander videos, especially because I introduce them to cards they've never seen before or never would think to play in commander because they think it's either more standard focused or modern focused, which is easily understandable. A lot of cards I overlook are because I don't really envision them as commander cards, but rather cards that are only good in some other format. So let's start it off here with the very first card is Spawning Pit, 2 mana artifact, really cheap for what it does. It's gonna give you a sack outlet. Basically you can sacrifice any creature. The benefit, like I said with a lot of cards, being able to sacrifice a creature without paying mana to just sacrifice it is so important because it enables so many combos. So many combos could be started just by sacrificing a creature and you don't have to pay any mana to do that. But it would be terrible if it just did that, right? So you do have this activated ability of 1 mana where you can remove 2 charge counters, so you have to remove 2, basically meaning you have to sacrifice 2 creatures in order to do that, to get a 2/2 spawn artifact creature token into play. That is especially useful if you are worried about board wipes and you want to sacrifice a bunch of creatures in response. Store those charge counters on it. It could also be a very underrated and valuable card in something like Atraxa, where you can just build up those counters over the course of the game. A lot of people aren't going to be too afraid of this card because they look at it and see you're only going to get 2/2s, but you're only paying 1 mana for those 2/2s. So if you have any artifact synergies, token synergies, any sort of anthems that are going to help you go wide, this card's pretty good. And again, combos, super efficient having a sack outlet that doesn't cost you any mana. Then we have 2 more artifacts. The next one here is Perilous Vault. I don't know what it is, but this card just doesn't see that much play in Commander. It's 4 mana to play and 5 mana to use the activated ability, so in reality, unless you have any way to reduce either cost, it's going to cost you a total of 9 mana to use it. You exile it and then you exile all non-land permanents. This is insane. You have something that isn't going to be countered when you use it usually, because once it's out there, your opponents have to have a way to counter the activated ability. So it could just sit out there. You could just spend 4 mana, have it sit out there. Just a threat of exiling the entire board is sometimes good enough on its own. You don't always have to use it. But hey, I mean, even if you do have to use it, you have a way to get around almost every problem imaginable. Things that prevent you from targeting them, things that prevent you from sacrificing them. There's a lot of things that prevent you from being able to remove them, and Perilous Vault just doesn't really care. And then the next card we have here is Meteor Golem. This card is amazing. Whether you want to play artifact decks or blink decks, anything that is capable of abusing the ETB or bringing it back, cheating it into play, whatever, it's going to be super good in. Enters the battlefield, destroys target non-land permanent and opponent controls. I love removal, especially when it comes from an artifact ETB or a creature ETB. Kind of goes along with something like Spine of Ishsaw, because you have a lot of cards that are going to stop you from dealing with things using non-creature spells. So when you have creature removal on an ETB, it's very useful. You also get a creature out there, you get a blocker. That's another reason why I like it. And then we have Stunt Double. I can't stop talking about this card. Again, something I don't see too often in a lot of blue decks, especially ones that focus on ETBs, but I see a lot of people play Clone. I don't see as many people play Stunt Double. This is basically a better clone. Has no restriction as far as what creatures you're able to copy. It could be yours, your opponent's, doesn't really matter. But it has flash, so you can do it at instant speed. I don't know why, for whatever reason. Maybe it's just the availability. Conspiracy 2, not the most common set. Hasn't been reprinted since then, but still. An amazing card if you're playing an average blue deck. I don't know why you wouldn't want to play it. And then we have Aberrant Overlord. This is amazing for black token decks. Ever since this card came out in Theros, I've been wanting to play this in every single deck, from Teysa, Orzhov Scion, to Endrick Sar, the Master Breeder, and even Yahenni. Anything that has to do with either sacrificing creatures or going wide, token decks, anything like that. I think Aberrant Overlord is amazing because according to your devotion to black, you're going to get that many Harpy creature tokens. You do have the downside of having to sacrifice a creature during your upkeep, but seeing as you could have a whole bunch of devotion to black, I don't really think you're in any real danger of running out of creatures. It's always going to count itself too, so you get that 2 devotion off of Aberrant Overlord Overlord itself. Even if you don't have anything else, you're going to get 2 Harpies, and you get a bunch of flying blockers, or you have a ton of flying attackers if you want to go wide with Anthems. That's pretty cool as well. And then the next card we have is in red, Frenzied Fugu. I don't know how you say that. Some people might be laughing right now, but the card itself is amazing. Red is known for having a lot of steal effects, especially when it comes to creatures. So if you're able to take a permanent, period, I think that's a huge bonus, because with red, it's usually just creatures. You can steal your opponent's creatures, steal one of each opponent's creatures, but when it enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain control of the enchanted permanent until the end of turn, and then you untap it, and it gains haste like the active treason cards you see all the time. The benefit to this is that it could be the best permanent on the field. Yeah, you're going to be giving it back to your opponent, but whenever you need to use it, whenever it's your turn, you're going to get it back. It could be super political. You could be teaming up with an opponent using their creature for good. You don't necessarily have to gang up on the player whose creature you're taking or whose permanent you're taking. And I like cards that do that, because this is Commander, this is a 4-player format usually, so you kind of have to think about cards in a multi-dimensional way. It isn't just take something from someone and pick on that same player. Really cool card. Now we have some green awesomeness with Mitotic Slime. This is one of those weird creatures that when it dies, you get token value out of it, but it just keeps on going. So anything that can recur this creature is going to be super good. When it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get 2/2/2 green ooze creature tokens that when they die, you're going to get 2 1/1 green ooze creature tokens. So if you have anybody that wants to board wipe, this is going to be a headache. You're going to get token value for days. So if you have any sort of requirements for sacrificing in order to do something, such as with the Aberrant Overlord, I don't really see too much wrong with having something like this where it could be sack fodder, especially if you have something like Marina Clan Neltoth. You could constantly bring it back and use it over and over again and get all that token value. But I just like the design of cards like these where when they die, they give you tokens that when they die, you get more tokens. Very unique. You don't always see that. And I wish they did it more often with tokens. The next card we have is Wild Pear. Incredibly underrated. I don't know why I don't see these cards more often. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you get to search your library for a creature card with the same total power and toughness and put it onto the battlefield. So it kind of forces you to build a deck with this in mind. So whatever creature you play, you're going to want to know your deck well. And I think it's important that we have cards like these, because you don't just throw it into your deck carelessly. You kind of have to know what you're doing. So that's good design right there. It's not just a cheap card, straightforward value. Very simple to understand. You kind of have to know what your deck is going to do, what kind of creatures you're going to have, and its total power and toughness. So if you know what you're doing, you can get a ton of value out of this. I see massive creature decks that use this to get even more of a board presence. You can keep the pressure on your opponents, and if left alone, this card is an absolute nightmare to have to deal with. Death Reap Ritual. Again, black-green. Love getting value with sacrificing stuff. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you may draw a card. The benefit here is that it's not just your creatures, it's any creature, because that's how awesome Morbid is. If you love removal, you can trigger it that way, or if you just have a way to sacrifice creatures on your opponent's turns so that you can draw a card during their end step, I think it's brilliant that way. But enchantments like this that slowly gain you some card advantage, I think are super good, because I think it's probably the most overlooked aspect of this game, that it's not just about board presence, but it's about card advantage, and that could be included with your hand as well. So if you run out of things to do, if you run out of spells to play, refilling your hand, even if it doesn't really seem like you need to, is never really a bad thing. And especially with decks like Marin, where you could easily overlook that because you have a ton of value in your graveyard, keeping a full hand, even if you do have to end up discarding at your end step, is never a bad thing. Then we have the final card here, and probably one of the most overlooked but yet one of the most awesome commanders is Vella the Nightclad. Has Intimidate. Other creatures you control have Intimidate. Whenever Vella or another creature you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent's going to lose 1 life. This card is spectacular, and a fun little trick that I didn't quite realize until I looked into it was that those devoid creatures, or really any creature like an Eldrazi with no color, really nothing can block them. But for the longest time when it came to ninja decks, we didn't have Yuriko, so you had to rely on something like Vella the Nightclad to make a lot of your creatures unblockable so that you could use Ninjutsu. Because Intimidate isn't as good as just making them unblockable, but it's the next best thing really. But another cool thing is that you can take advantage of your creature's commanders leaving the battlefield, each opponent's going to lose 1 life. One of the most underappreciated things about Vella is how you can just punish your opponents with a ton of creature tokens, with things like Blood Artist on top of Vella's trigger. Things like Zulaport Cutthroat are already punishing enough. You tack this onto it, your opponents aren't going to have a good time. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for these 10 underrated commander cards. Let me know what you think about them. As always, I'll try to get more of these videos out there. Seeing as you guys really appreciate the series, I'm going to continue it. You guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.